During the war, he said to me how much he hated London, but he said, of course, you can't leave when people are being bombed to bits all around you.
'Tis you must fall, and I must fly.
The novelist Julian Simmons became one of Orwell's closest friends during the war.
There was something both very friendly about Orwell when you met him, but also something very remote. He was a kind of permanent outsider, and his behaviour was sometimes absurd in what I found an endearing way. Like at our lunches, there would always be on the menu perhaps some really quite good bit of food, like, say, liver and bacon. Orwell would never have that. What he would go for would be the victory pie, which was practically uneatable, and he would eat it quite zestfully and say with, in a rather happy way, you won't get anything better than this nowadays.
King and Queen in London continue the inspection of the areas which have suffered in the nightly bombing of the capital.
What he called the "we're all in it together" mood of 1940 forced Orwell to change his attitude to his compatriots.
I fell into the trap of assuming that the war and the revolution are inseparable. Now, I have to admit that I was grossly wrong in my analysis of the situation. It would be absurd to imagine that Britain is on the brink of revolution.
Churchill boasted that the motto of the British people was business as usual. Orwell was both frustrated and charmed by this lack of reaction. He was concerned about the future.
Life goes on much the same. In the face of terrifying dangers and golden political opportunities, people just keep on keeping on, in a sort of twilight sleep in which they are conscious of nothing but the daily round of work, family life, darts at the pub, exercising the dog, bringing home the supper, beer, etc., etc. And the Home Guard. It is so very typical of Britain that this vast organisation has had absolutely no conscious political development at all. It has not developed into the People's Army like the Spanish militias. It is held together by no political creed, but by inarticulate patriotism. The fact that more than 2 million men have rifles in their bedrooms, and the authorities contemplate this without dismay, is the sign of a stability unequalled by any other country in the world.
In 1941, Orwell, having abandoned hope of revolution, even put aside his quest for truth. He joined the Ministry of Information's propaganda unit, the BBC. He would produce and present a radio show for listeners in India. His BBC office was room 101.
He certainly thought that propaganda machines are propaganda machines, and he didn't like being part of one. On the other hand, he accepted that a war required all this apparatus.
London Calling at the beginning of tonight's broadcast in the BBC's Eastern Service.
In the Far East, the governor of Hong Kong states that heavy fighting is in progress.
In Britain, the fat ration has been cut down to 8 ounces a week. The ordinary people who have to put up with these restrictions do not grumble.
Is stabilized on any of the fronts. And in the Far East, the Japanese are still getting further advantages from their first treacherous surprise attack.
By far the most important event during this week is the Anglo-Russian Treaty. I consider I kept our propaganda slightly less disgusting than it might otherwise have been, deodorized it to some small extent. But I felt I was just an orange that was being trodden on by a very dirty boot.
He thought that you could use propaganda machines to invent anything and to make people make speeches they hadn't ever made and so on. I remember he used to, I think he once tried to do, or toyed with the idea of taking little extracts from Winston's recorded speeches and have him declare peace. You see, in the middle of war, he thought you could have done that.
बर्तानिया में हुकूमत की तरफ से दिया जाने
For 2 years, he was a reluctant mouthpiece for the government. But in 1943, Orwell resigned from the BBC.
I had become conscious that I was wasting my own time and the public money on doing work that produced no result.